The chamber was packed, the tension thick enough to choke on. Cameras clicked, eyes darted. Beneath the polished speeches and staged performances, something darker pulsed. Exhaustion, fear, mistrust. America was tired of division, of shouting, of feeling like the truth was lost in someone else's script. Representative Elise Stefanik had the floor, her voice sharp and certain. She leaned into her argument about election integrity with the practiced ease of someone who had said it 1,000 times. Her words were fire for her base and gasoline for her critics. "This isn't about fear," she declared. "It's about protecting democracy from decay." Some clapped, some scoffed. But in the corner of the panel, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat silent. Still, focused. She wasn't scrolling. She wasn't whispering to aides. She was listening, not to the sound, but to the meaning. And then, as Stefanik reached her final crescendo, it happened. Crockett leaned forward, gently lifted her mic, and said one sentence. Not loud, not angry. Just 11 soft-spoken words that pierced the air like a prayer dipped in truth. And when she finished, the entire room, Republicans, Democrats, aides, journalists, froze. Even Stefanik blinked, unsure how to breathe. Who decides what integrity looks
His
like
name
when
was
truth
painted
feels
across a mural
unsafe?
in bold, bright color.
That was it.
And
11
beneath
words,
it, a quote from Jasmine's
no accusations,
panel.
no interruptions,
Truth
no names
doesn't
called.
shout. It
but
just
the impact,
refuses to stay silent.
Immediate. A heartbeat
She
later,
stood there quietly,
every breath in
alone,
the chamber stalled.
hand resting on the brick.
It was as if the walls
A
themselves
young boy
stopped
walked
listening
up,
to noise,
maybe 11,
and leaned in
maybe
to hear.
12.
He looked at her, eyes
That.
wide.
Are you the lady
Jasmine
from
Crockett
TV?
didn't look
He
triumphant.
She smiled
didn't smirk.
softly.
She just
Maybe.
held her gaze
He
steady.
nodded.
Not at
My
Stefanik,
mama said you spoke
but
for
across
us.
the room.
She cried when
At
we
everyone.
did. Jasmine
America.
knelt, meeting his eyes.
Stefanik opened
You
her
can
mouth
speak
to respond,
too, she
but
said.
no words came.
Your voice matters.
Not yet.
Always.
She wasn't used to questions
He
that
nodded
weren't
again.
traps. Then,
Just
without
truth.
a word, hugged her. A journalist
Not because she
scribbled
was
the quote.
famous,
Another
but
blinked back
because she was
tears.
honest.
The
Behind
question
her
wasn't
cars
political.
honked in the distance.
It was human.
Life went on.
It was the kind of thing
But
you
something
asked
had
when your
changed.
heart still worked.
In her city,
When you
in her
remembered
country,
that democracy wasn't
and
paperwork.
most of all, in
It
the
was
way people finally listened.
People who bled
She
and
stood up,
cried and begged for
wiped her
something
eyes,
real.
and smiled toward the
Crockett?
sky. For her
She didn't
cousin,
continue.
for her
She
father,
didn't lecture.
for them
She
all.
leaned back.
A year later,
silence
the
didn't
segment
feel
was still
empty.
being shown in
It
classrooms,
felt sacred.
community centers, and family living
And
rooms.
somewhere in the back
not
row,
because
a
it was
staffer
dramatic,
whispered,
but because it was
she didn't just
real.
ask that. She meant it.
People didn't just remember
The
what
hearing
Jasmine
wasn't
said.
over,
They
but the
remembered
game
how
had
they
changed.
felt.
For
The
once, it
stillness,
wasn't about
the
winning.
crack in Glenn's
It was
voice,
about healing.
the way their own chests ached
Elise
without
Stefanik
warning.
had never been
That
shaken
pain
on the
stayed.
floor. Not once.
But so did the hope.
She thrived on tension.
Jasmine never
on
turned the moment
counterpunches.
into merchandise.
But now,
She didn't
blinking
chase the
slowly,
fame.
she wasn't
returned to
facing
her
a
work.
fight.
With more
She was
weight, more
facing a
clarity,
mirror.
more power than
And
ever
in that
before.
reflection was a question with
Glenn
no spin.
Greenwald invited her to co-host
She
a
glanced
discussion
down at her
series
notes.
about political
They
empathy.
suddenly looked small.
She agreed, on
Talking
one condition.
points, stats,
We don't perform.
rehearsed lines.
We listen.
All felt hollow next to
He agreed.
that.
And that series
Jasmine
became
Crockett
something
didn't
beautiful.
press.
Two
She
former
didn't need to.
opponents reshaping how
That
America
question
talked,
had already begun
and more
to crack
importantly,
something.
how it heard.
Not just in Stefanik. In
The
whole
night the
room.
first episode aired,
A Capitol Hill
Jasmine sat
photographer
alone in
crouched
her
behind
office.
the press table.
the lights
quietly
low,
lowered his camera.
her cousin's photo
He later
beside
said
her.
he didn't want to break the moment.
She whispered, "We're still here.
It felt like church.
They hear
he
us
recalled.
now."
Back at
Then,
the dais,
she closed her
Stefanik cleared
eyes.
her throat.
And for the
Her
first time
voice,
in a
when it
long
returned,
time,
was quieter.
she rested.
Congresswoman Crockett,
Because the truth
she
had
said,
done its work.
I'm
and it
not
wasn't
sure
going
how to
anywhere.
respond to that.
If this story
Crockett
moved you,
didn't answer.
if you
She offered
cried,
only a nod.
if you saw yourself
Not
in
smug,
Jasmine,
not
if you
dismissive,
felt anything real
just
tonight,
present.
don't scroll away.
That was the real shit.
Subscribe.
Crockett wasn't
So
performing.
stories like this
She was living
don't get
the
buried.
truth.
Like,
In America, watching
if
from
truth,
couches, phones,
quiet
break rooms,
truth matters
felt
to
it.
you.
because sometimes it takes
Comment.
just one voice.
Tell us your
Calm, clear,
story.
courageous,
We're listening.
to stop the
We
storm.
really are.
And start the
Because the
healing.
world doesn't change with noise. It changes when someone dares to tell the truth, and someone else finally hears it. Thank you for staying till the end. We felt this with you, and we're not done yet.
She wasn't a lawmaker. She wasn't press. She wasn't even staff. Her name was Margaret Ellison, Retired schoolteacher. Widowed. Voted in every election since 1976. She'd taken the 4:20 a.m. bus from Baltimore just to sit in the back row of this hearing. "I just want to hear something real," she told the security guard at check-in. When Jasmine Crockett spoke those 11 words, Margaret's hand gripped her chest. Not because of a heart attack, because she remembered something. Something from decades ago, when she taught civics to 9th graders in a crumbling school with no heat in winter. "Democracy," she used to say, "isn't a building. It's a promise." Now, in that chamber, with voices so often used as weapons, Margaret saw something rare, someone asking a question not to trap or shame, but to remind. She wiped her eyes with a tissue folded 4 times. Outside, protesters kept chanting, reporters kept talking. But inside, Margaret whispered to no one, "That's what leadership is." She didn't know Jasmine Crockett's full history. She didn't care. In that moment, Crockett wasn't a congresswoman. She was a truth-teller. And for Margaret, who thought she'd seen it all, that meant everything. Tyrone Matthews had covered Congress. His name was painted across a mural in bold, bright color. He didn't believe in moments, beneath it a quote from Jasmine's panel. Deadlines. But after Truth doesn't shout, he could just refuses to stay silent. Around him, journalists
She stood there
quietly,
glances,
alone,
not with
hand
raised
resting on
eyebrows
the
or
brick.
smug disbelief.
A young
but
boy
with a
walked
silence
up,
that said,
maybe 11,
"Did you feel
maybe
that too?"
12. He looked at her,
One
eyes
leaned over
wide.
and whispered,
"Are you the lady
"Is
from
anyone
TV?"
else?"
he asked.
Shaken.
She smiled softly.
They were.
"Maybe."
It wasn't the
He
power
nodded.
of volume.
"My
It
mama
was the
said you
depth
spoke
of
for us.
conviction.
She cried when you did."
Tyrone looked at Crockett's
Jasmine
face
knelt,
again,
meeting his
calm,
eyes.
still, sincere.
"You can speak too," she
wasn't
said.
basking in attention.
"Your voice matters."
She wasn't trying to trend.
Always.
She was
He
present,
nodded again.
anchored.
Then, without a
And
word,
for the
hugged
first
her.
time in his career,
Not because she was
Tyrone
famous,
deleted his lead
but
paragraph
because she
and
was
started
honest.
over.
Behind
Not
her,
because he
cars
had
honked
to.
in the distance.
Because he
Life
owed
went
it.
on.
The
But
chamber
something had
did not
changed.
erupt, he typed.
In her city,
It
in her
paused.
country,
Not out of
and
confusion,
most of all,
but out of reverence.
in the way people finally listened.
He looked around the room.
She stood up, wiped her
Elise
eyes,
Stefanik was
and
still
smiled
thinking.
toward the sky.
Staffers were still
For her
holding
cousin.
their breath.
For
And
her
Jasmine
father.
Crockett,
For them all.
she hadn't moved.
A year later, the
In an
segment
age
was still
where the
being shown
loudest
in
voice
classrooms,
usually wins,
community
she had
centers,
chosen
and
a
family
different
living
path.
rooms, not because it
And
was
the
dramatic,
world
but
noticed.
because it was real.
Because sometimes the truth
People didn't just
doesn't
remember
scream.
what Jasmine said.
Sometimes
They remembered how they
it
felt.
waits
The stillness,
and dares
the
you
crack
to
in
answer.
Glenn's voice, the way
As
their
the
own
hearing
chests
paused,
ached without
Jasmine's
warning.
phone buzzed
That
in her
pain
coat
stayed.
pocket. She rarely
But
checked
so
her
did the
phone
hope.
during sessions. But this
Jasmine
time,
never turned the moment
something
into
told her to
merchandise.
look.
She didn't
It was
chase
a
the
text from
fame.
her mother.
She
Just
returned to
3
her
words.
work with more weight,
She would
more
have
clarity, more power than
Jasmine's
ever
breath
before.
caught. She knew exactly
Glenn Greenwald
who
invited
she
her to
was.
co-host a discussion
Her
series
grandmother,
about political
Lottie Mae,
empathy. She
a
agreed
seamstress from
on one
Beaumont,
condition.
Texas.
We don't
Marched for
perform.
voting rights in
We listen.
shoes with holes in the soles.
He
A
agreed,
woman who once told
and
a
that series
9-year-old
became
Jasmine,
something beautiful.
"Speak soft,
2
baby,
former opponents
but make
reshaping
sure
how
you
America
listen."
talked, and more importantly,
Lottie Mae had
how it
passed
heard.
4 years ago. But
The night the
somehow
first
Jasmine
episode
felt her
aired,
today,
Jasmine
sitting
sat
with her
alone
in
in
her
her
chair,
office,
holding her shoulder,
the lights
whispering,
low,
"That's it,
her
baby.
cousin's photo
That's the
beside her.
moment."
She whispered,
Jasmine
"We're still
blinked
here."
fast,
They
clearing
hear
the
us
steam in
now.
her eyes. This
Then,
wasn't about
she closed her
political
eyes,
goals. It
and for the
wasn't
first
that
time in a long
It was
time,
about honor,
she rested,
about remembering
because the
why
truth
she
had
run
done
in
its
the
work,
first place.
and it
Not
wasn't
to
going
shout,
anywhere.
to serve,
If this story
make
moved
space
you,
for truth to breathe
if you
again.
cried, if you saw
She
yourself
slid
in
the phone
Jasmine,
back into her coat,
if you felt
sat
anything
up
real
straighter,
tonight,
and looked around the room.
don't scroll away.
No chaos.
Subscribe,
No noise.
so stories
Just a
like
chamber
this
waiting.
don't get buried.
Not for another attack,
Like,
but for something
if truth,
honest.
quiet truth, matters
And
to you,
Jasmine Crockett was ready.
comment. Tell us your story. We're listening. We really are. Because the world doesn't change with noise. It changes when someone dares to tell the truth, and someone else finally hears it. Thank you for staying till the end. We felt this with you, and we're not done yet. Elise Stefanik stared at her notes, though she wasn't reading them. The paper blurred. Her ears rang. She had expected a fight, a back and forth of numbers and narratives. She had speeches for that, weapons, shields. But what Jasmine Crockett asked wasn't an attack. It was a mirror, and Elise saw herself in it. Not the headlines, not the press conferences, but the version of her she used to believe in, before the party lines, before the polling data, before everything got loud. She was angry at first, angry at how that one question had cracked her confidence. But then something strange settled over her. Regret. She remembered her law school years, how she'd once written a paper on the fragility of democracy. How she'd told her father, "If I ever lose sight of what matters, stop me." Her father was gone now, and here she was, stunned silent by a woman younger than her, asking the question she should have asked. Elise finally spoke, voice lower. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said again, "I think we've all forgotten why we're here. It wasn't surrender, it was recognition." And in that small shift, something rare was born between them. Respect. Crockett didn't rush to fill the air. She let Stefanik's words settle like dust in sunlight. His name was painted across a mural. Stillness, in bold, not silence color. From fear, and beneath silence from Jasmine's panel. Across the chamber, truth doesn't shout. More people were sitting straight. It just refuses to stay silent. Not out of defense, but curiosity. She stood there quietly, alone, what will she say hand next? Resting on the brick. But a young boy walked up. What does this mean for us? Maybe 11, maybe 12. Crockett finally leaned in. He looked at her, eyes wide. She spoke gently. "Are you the lady from TV in this country?" He asked. "That's why she smiled asked the hard questions. Not to win," he nodded, "but to remind us what's at stake. My mama said you spoke for us. She cried again. When you did." Jasmine knelt, meeting his eyes. "You can speak too," she said. The posturing, your voice pretending that we're not hurting. Always. A quiet murmur ran through the chamber. Then, without a sound of souls shifting in their chairs. Not because she was famous. People out there because she was honest. They don't trust the process. Behind her cars honked in the distance. Not because they hate America. Life went on. But because something had changed, and they're afraid of slipping away. In her country, no claps, and most of all, no booze. In the way people just listened. Crockett looked at Stefanik, wiped her eyes. "Maybe we don't agree on policy, but can we agree that truth should never feel dangerous?" For them all. Stefanik slowly nodded. A year later, the segment wasn't still political strategy. Classrooms, community centers, and family living rooms. And in that moment, not because it was a new kind of leadership, but because it was real, not out of dominance. People didn't just remember what Jasmine said. Back in Dallas, they remembered how they felt. Modest one-story homes filled with the crack in family photos. The way their Jasmine's Uncle Willie sat glued to his TV. That pain stayed. He hadn't meant to watch the hearing. So did the hope. He usually found Jasmine never turned the moment into merchandise. But today, she didn't chase the fame. Had stopped him from changing. She returned to her work. And now, with more weight, more clarity, more power than ever before. "That's my niece." Glenn Greenwald invited her to co-host a discussion series about political empathy. Then set it down. She agreed. On one condition. We don't perform. Those 11 words, we listen, echoed in his chest like a song he'd forgotten he knew. And that series his wife, became Dolores, walked in with a plate of food. Two former opponents, reshaping how America talked, again? And more importantly, she teased how it heard. Willie didn't answer. The night the first episode aired, he just looked at the screen. Jasmine sat alone in her office. Jasmine wasn't shouting. The lights low. She was her cousin's photo beside her. She looked just like her mama used to. "We're still here. Same fire. They hear us now." She made him listen. She closed her eyes. Said, and for the first time in a long time, "You think the world's changing?" Because the truth had done its work, and it wasn't going anywhere. If we let women like her lead, if this story moved you, maybe. If you cried, if you saw yourself the neighborhood Jasmine, kids played in the Texas if you felt sun, anything real tonight. Inside, 2 elders sat in silence. Don't scroll away. Proud, shaking, subscribe, hopeful. So stories because like they hadn't just watched a moment in Congress. Like, they'd watched a seed of healing finally being planted truth by one of theirs to you. Comment. Tell us your story. We're listening. We really are. Because the world doesn't change with noise. It changes when someone dares to tell the truth, and someone else finally hears it. Thank you for staying till the end. We felt this with you, and we're not done yet. 1,000 miles away in a quiet Atlanta kitchen, 16-year-old Janya Brown replayed the clip for the 5th time. She wasn't into politics. She didn't trust it. Nobody ever seemed to speak for people like her. Kids juggling part-time jobs, caring for siblings, watching their moms cry over unpaid rent notices. But something about Jasmine Crockett's voice stopped her. Not just the question, though that part felt like it broke something open inside her. But what came after? The stillness. The truth. Jania sat in silence, her cereal untouched. Her little brother played on the floor, but she didn't hear him. She was somewhere else now, imagining what it would feel like to stand in a room like that and say something that mattered. She opened her journal and wrote the words down. Who decides what integrity looks like when truth feels unsafe? Then, beneath it, maybe I'm not too young to try. Later that day, she asked her guidance counselor how to join the school's debate team. A ripple had started. Not in Washington, in a Georgia kitchen. Because when one woman speaks with courage, 1,000 others remember their voice. And some, like Jania, begin to use it. James T. Harris sat in his dark office just blocks from the Capitol. A longtime aide to a senior Republican senator across a mural. He was known for being unreadable, color, stone-faced, and beneath it a quote from Jasmine's panel. He'd watched hearings for decades. Truth doesn't shout. Nothing surprised him anymore. It just refuses to stay silent. Until today. Crockett's question didn't just surprise him, hand resting on the brick. It broke something in him. A young boy, his daughter Layla, had sent him the clip 3 minutes after it aired. He looked at her with a simple text. "Are you the lady from TV? This is what leadership looks like, Dad." She smiled softly. He didn't respond. He just watched. "My mama said you spoke Crockett's voice filled his screen. She cried when you did." He thought about Layla. Jasmine knelt, meeting about the argument they'd had 2 weeks ago. "You can speak too," she said. When he told her politics was about voice matters, not feelings. He nodded again. He wasn't so sure. Then, without a word, he reached into his drawer, not because she was famous, pulled out a photo of Layla at her high school graduation, she was honest, and stared at it. Behind her, cars honked in the distance. For the first time in years, his eyes watered. But something had changed. He'd been proven wrong in her city, because he'd been reminded, and most of all, reminded that policy wasn't finally listened. It was people. She stood up. It was daughters. Wiped her eyes. It was moments like this, toward the sky, when someone asked a question not to destroy, but to heal them all. And James Harris, a year later, the segment was still being shown in classrooms, community centers, and family living rooms, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Then, slowly, softly, people didn't just remember what Jasmine said. It wasn't thunderous. They remembered how they felt. The stillness, the crack in Glenn's voice, the way their own chests ached without warning. And then, that pain stayed. Not a standing ovation, but a recognition. Jasmine never turned the moment into merchandise. She didn't chase the fame. Elise Stefanik didn't stop. She returned to her work. She didn't smirk. With more weight, more clarity, she simply nodded, more power than ever before. Not in agreement with everything. Glenn Greenwald invited her to co-host a discussion series about political empathy. Jasmine Crockett didn't smile for the cameras. On one condition. She simply turned her mic off and folded her hands. Her work, in that moment, was done. And that series became something beautiful. Two former opponents reshaping how America talked. One of the younger interns, how it heard. Eyes wide, heart pounding. The night the first episode aired, Jasmine sat alone in her office. The lights low, her cousin's photo beside her. "That's not quiet," she whispered. "We're still here. That's change. They hear us now." Reporters were already typing. Then, she closed her eyes. But this time their words weren't about scandal or shouting. For the first time in a long time, they were about a question. She rested. And a woman because the truth had done its work. And it wasn't going anywhere. The noise of D.C. buzzed on. If this story moved you, but inside that chamber, if you cried, something sacred, if you saw yourself in Jasmine, not a win, if you felt anything real tonight, shift. Don't scroll away. And in that rare, beautiful pause, America breathed stories like this easier. Don't get buried, even if just for a moment. If truth, quiet truth, matters to you, comment. Tell us your story. We're listening. We really are. Because the world doesn't change with noise. It changes when someone dares to tell the truth, and someone else finally hears it. Thank you for staying till the end. We felt this with you, and we're not done yet. Down the marble hallway outside the chamber, a little boy tugged on his father's hand. His name was Amir. He was 9. His father, Malik, worked maintenance at the Capitol. Amir wasn't supposed to be there, but it was take your child to work day, and school was out. Malik had planned to sweep past the hearing room quickly. Politics wasn't for kids, he thought. But as they passed, they heard something. Or rather, they felt it. That hush, that weight. They paused near the door. Through the small glass window, Amir saw Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't standing tall or raising her voice. She was just there, peaceful, like she didn't need to fight to be strong. "Who's she?" Amir whispered. Malik hesitated. "That's someone brave." Later that night, Amir sat at the kitchen table and drew a picture. A woman at a desk, quiet but glowing. He labeled it Truth Speaker. When Malik asked why he drew her, Amir shrugged. "She didn't yell," he said, "but everyone still listened." And Malik, who'd swept these halls for 17 years, felt something swell in his chest. Hope. Because maybe, just maybe, the next generation had just found a hero. That night, a letter appeared on social media. It wasn't from a celebrity. It wasn't from a politician. It was from a college freshman named Luis Hernandez. His name was painted across a mural in bold, bright color. He wrote, and beneath it a quote from Jasmine's "For the first time in my life, I watched a congressional hearing from start to finish. It just refuses to stay silent. I had to. Because I couldn't look away." She stood there quietly, alone, Jasmine Crockett resting on the brick. Her voice. A young boy walked up, maybe 11, maybe 12. I used to think politics was just noise, eyes wide. But today I realized, "Are you the lady from TV?" he asked. She smiled. "I want to work for someone like her one day." He nodded. "Yet. My mama said you spoke for us. She cried when you did." The letter had over 500,000 shares, meeting his eyes. It was posted on school bulletin boards, she said, printed in a newspaper. "Your voice matters," read aloud on a morning radio show. He nodded again. And Jasmine, then, without a word, she saw it during breakfast. Not because she was famous, still steaming beside her, but because she was honest. She didn't cry. Behind her cars honked in the distance. Her eyes, whispered, "Life went on." And but something had changed. In her city, "This is why I do." In her country, because the ripple was most real. Of all, in the way people finally listened. She stood up, wiped her eyes, country started to remember toward the politics at its best. For her cousin isn't about power. For her father, it's about for them all. A year later, back in the segment was still being shown in classrooms, community centers, and family living rooms. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Stayed empty. It was people didn't just remember what Jasmine said. Quietly. They remembered how they felt. The stillness, the crack in Glenn's voice, the way their own chests ached without warning. Was done. That pain stayed. The chair she left behind sat still, untouched. Jasmine never turned the moment into merchandise. She didn't chase the fame. Tour group paused. She returned to her work with more weight, more clarity, more power than ever before. Rules of order. Glenn Greenwald invited her to co-host a discussion series about political empathy. She agreed on one condition. We don't perform. We listen. That congresswoman. He agreed. Who asked the question. And that series became something beautiful. Smiled. Two former opponents reshaping how America talked, and more importantly, how it heard. A few stepped closer, peeking the night the first episode aired. Looking at something Jasmine sat alone in her office. The lights low. Because her cousin's photo beside her. So she whispered, "We're still here." Even an empty chair. They hear us now, like a monument. Then, not to victory, she closed her eyes, but to integrity. And for the first time in a long time, and in that silence, she rested. Something else was because planted. The truth had done its work. A reason to, and it wasn't going anywhere. A reason. If this story moved tomorrow, if you cried, healing had, if you saw yourself in Jasmine, if you felt anything real tonight, don't scroll away. Subscribe, so stories like this don't get buried. Like, if truth, quiet truth, matters to you. Comment. Tell us your story. We're listening. We really are. Because the world doesn't change with noise. It changes when someone dares to tell the truth. And someone else finally hears it. Thank you for staying till the end. We felt this with you, and we're not done yet. Jasmine sat alone in her office. Lights low, heels off. The buzz of Capitol Hill muffled by the quiet hum of her thoughts. Her phone lit up. "Mom." She answered quickly. "Hey, Ma." There was a long pause on the other end, then her mother's voice, soft and unshaken. I watched the whole thing. Jasmine's breath hitched. Her mother didn't flatter. She didn't fuss. She told the truth. Always had. "You didn't shout," her mother said. "You didn't try to be louder than them. But baby, you were stronger." Jasmine closed her eyes. Your grandma would be so proud, her mom continued. That question you asked, that came from her. I heard it. I felt it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then, quietly, Jasmine asked, "Did I do the right thing?" Her mother didn't hesitate. You reminded the world what right even means, Jazz. Tears finally came. Not from sadness, from release. Because no matter what headlines said, no matter how the world twisted the story, that one call, that one voice, meant everything. And in her mother's words, Jasmine didn't feel like a congresswoman. She felt like home. 2 weeks later, at a small-town church in Missouri, Pastor Daniel stepped up to the pulpit. The sermon was titled, "His name was painted across a mural in walks in bright color." The pews were full. A quote from Jasmine's panel. Teens, single mothers, truth doesn't shout. Factory workers. It just refuses to stay silent. All listening. Pastor Daniel stood there quietly, notes, alone, then paused, hand resting on the brick. He looked at the crowd and said, "A young boy walked up. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett asked, maybe 12. A few looked at her, eyes others wide. Leaned in. Are you the lady from TV?" And repeated it slowly. She smiled softly. Who decides what integrity looks like when truth feels unsafe? My mama said you spoke for us. The room exhaled. She cried when you did. Like they'd been holding that question in their hearts without realizing it. You can speak. I'm not here to talk politics. Your voice matters. I'm here to talk courage. He nodded again. That kind of question isn't meant to win debates. It's meant to wake us up. But murmurs of amen filled the air. Behind her, cars honked in the distance. God sometimes uses the softest voices to do the loudest work. In her city, in that moment, in her country, Jasmine wasn't just a lawmaker. She was a messenger. Listened, echoing far beyond D.C. Wiped her eyes, reaching places the cameras never could. For her cousin, and in that church, for her father, as the choir stood to sing, all, truth didn't feel unsafe anymore. The segment was still being shown in classrooms, community centers, and family 3 months later. Not because Jasmine Crockett sat on a bench outside the Capitol, watching the sun dip low. People didn't just remember the hearing had faded from the headlines. They remembered how they felt. Other scandals, the stillness, other chaos, the crack taken center stage, the way their own chests ached something lingered. That pain stayed. She saw it in the letters on her desk, but so did the hope. Handwritten notes. Jasmine never turned pastors, the moment veterans, nurses. She didn't chase the fame. She heard it in the quiet. She returned to her work, whispered in airports, elevators, more power than ever before. She hadn't changed the world overnight. Glenn Greenwald invited her to co-host a discussion series about political empathy. A small tremor in a tired country's heartbeat. We don't perform that. We listen. Enough. She pulled out her phone and opened a blank post. And that series became something beautiful. No slogans. Two former opponents reshaping how America talked. Keep asking more questions no one dares to. How it heard. She hit send. The night the first episode aired, walked back inside. Jasmine sat alone in her office, eyes clear. The lights low. Because for Jasmine Crockett, truth was never about applause. She whispered, it was about service. They about lighting a path for others to follow. Then, and tonight, somewhere in Georgia, Texas, Arizona, for the first time in a long time, someone else would speak up. She rested. Not because they had to shout its work, but because they had finally seen what quiet courage could do. If you cried, now, dear viewer, if you saw yourself, if this story moved you, if you felt even one sentence made you feel seen, don't scroll away. Please like this video, subscribe, leave a comment, so stories like this don't get buried. Like, let's carry this question together. Quiet truth. Let's keep the silence powerful and the truth alive. Tell us your story. We're listening. We really are. Because the world doesn't change with noise. It changes when someone dares to tell the truth, and someone else finally hears it. Thank you for staying till the end. We felt this with you, and we're not done yet.